Well, good morning, everyone. Good to see you. This is the toughest nails crowd, I assume. We brave the snow and will survive. Anyway, I want to give a shout out to our friends in Gallup as well today. So a few months ago, some of y'all were here. Perry Stepp was here with the Biblical Institute of Zagreb, Croatia. They train pastors throughout Central Europe. Really pretty cool ministry. But he brought with him Irvin, who was one of the local pastors and professors at the Bible College. And understanding their context is a whole lot different than ours. Most churches in Croatia are probably 20 to 50 people on a given Sunday. And 50 would be like a big church. And so Irvin, after second service, if you've been here second service, you know, he was like, so how many people would come to Valley View? And I said, well, it's kind of a moving target. If everybody were here on the same Sunday, we've got big problems because that's over 1,000 people. But most of the time, we have about 550 to 600 people. And Irvin asked me a question, and it stopped me in my tracks. He asked this question: how many of those are what you would call customer? And I mean, it had me to kind of rethink my own life a little bit. Have I become a consumer of all things church? Also think about Kyle Eidelman, who's a pastor in Louisville, Kentucky. In 2016, he wrote a book after examining his own life, and the title of the book is called Not a Fan. You see, as he examined his own life, he felt like he was more of a fan of Jesus than he was a follower of Jesus. So I'm going to ask you a question today. Are you a fan or are you a follower of Jesus? You see, I think that's a tough question to answer. You see, I sometimes question, do we even know what it means to be a follower or to follow Jesus? And as I think about this, I think about our modern concept of social media, where you will say that I follow somebody or I follow a particular organization. And what we've done with the word follow is we have lowered the bar immensely as far as what it means to be a follower. So with that, I want to switch gears in our minds just a little bit here today, and I want to kind of rethink how we consider who we are as Christ followers. Let me ask this question. In fact, it is ingrained into almost 2,000 years of church history. What do we call people who believe in Jesus and go to church? Christian. That is the word that we typically use, and Christian is kind of a couple of words together, Christ and little ones, and it was often in early church referred to in the negative of little Christs. And that's where people had this idea in their mind. So let me ask you this question. How many times is the word Christian used in the Bible? Doug, you get the prize. I don't know what the prize is, but Doug gets the prize. 3 times. The word Christian is used 3 times. So with that in mind, what did Jesus say to his followers as he was getting ready to go up, ascend into heaven until he comes again? What did he tell his followers? He said these words. We're not going to look at all of this, but in Matthew chapter 28, verse 19, he says, therefore, go and make disciples. He told his disciples to make disciples. Now, going to throw out another thing. You know how many times the word disciple or disciples is mentioned in the New Testament? In the New Living Translation, which is what I preach from, 297 times. And then if you add the word follower or followers, you get another 43 times. So Christian is used 3 times, and disciple, disciples, follower, followers is used 340 times. The purpose of the church is not to make Christians, but to make disciples or followers of Jesus. And as I said last week, as followers of Jesus, we help people follow Jesus. That's the mission that God has given us as a church. But do we know what that looks like? Do we know what it looks like to follow Jesus? And if we know what it looks like to follow Jesus, do we know how to help people follow Jesus? And so I think the best place to start, the Bible. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 4. As we are, that's page 699 in the Bibles in the seats in front of you, if you'd like to use one of those. We're going to start with verse 18, and I want to go ahead and read through verse 22. One day, Jesus was walking along the shore of Galilee. He saw 2 brothers, Simon, also called Peter, and Andrew, throwing a net into the water, for they fished for a living. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." And they left their nets at once and followed him. A little farther up the shore, he saw 2 other brothers, James and John, sitting in a boat with their father Zebedee, repairing their nets. And he called them to come too. They immediately followed him, leaving the boat and their father behind. Now, I think about this here. We talk about verse 19. We're going to spend most of our time in verse 19 here this morning. Verse 19 is actually where we get our idea of head, heart, and hands, because there's a head decision, there's a follow. There is a heart decision where Jesus says, "And I will make you," or "I will show you." And then how to fish for people, again, is Jesus saying that there are your hands and feet are also involved in this decision. But what I would like to do today is go back 2,000 years ago and understand that something that was happening 2,000 years ago, that especially with the advent of the age where we started building factories and started mass producing goods and started mass producing education, one of the things that happened at that point in time is we lost the idea of apprenticeship and discipleship as it was done for centuries leading up to that. So I want to go back 2,000 years ago and understand what was happening in towns all throughout Judea, Israel, where Jewish young men were growing up. See, at age 5, a boy would enter into training. And from the age 5 to the age 12, a Jewish boy would memorize the first 5 books of the Old Testament: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. So by age 12, we're soft today. We don't use all of our minds. And age 5 to age 12, at age 12, most of those young men would go be discipled, become disciples of the family trade. They would go home, start their life, start their career, and that's how life was. But if you were really smart, and the teachers of what's called the Talmud would have looked at that, a couple of the young boys, they would have said, they need to go to Midrash. And so from the age of 12, 13, all the way to age 17, they would memorize the other 34 books of the Old Testament. Okay? Again, we're soft. We don't use our brains like they used to use their brains. And then at age 17, when they were done, they would go back and they would become disciples of the family trade. That's what they would do. And so that's what would happen to most of them. But there were also these guys, they were called rabbis, teachers. And they would travel around, and they would go into synagogues, and they would go into communities, and they would teach. And every rabbi that was teaching had a group of followers that would walk around with them. And so as they're walking around and they're teaching in different communities and different settings, if they see a young man who possessed a great understanding and appeared to have a great knowledge of the Old Testament, it wasn't necessarily a head knowledge, but they had truly become to understand this, he would look at that young man in the synagogue and he would say, "Follow me." He was like, "Follow me around." Now, everybody understood at that point in time that which must happen, that the prospective follower and his family would understand that their life would be consumed by three developing patterns that every rabbi would expect. And they also understood that any connection and loyalty to their previous life was severed. It was over. And so let me explain to you what a disciple, as they were called by a rabbi, would understand. When they would hear these particular words of "follow me," they knew that a follower would be with the rabbi. So for a period of time, it might be 3 years, it might be 5 years, it might be 10 years. They would follow a rabbi around. They would eat with him. They would walk along the road with him. They would do life together. They'd sit around the campfire together. They would pray with him. He would have private times where they were in dialogue, and they would ask him questions, and he would ask them questions. And it was just kind of this time where they just did life together. And they also understood that their time with the rabbi would eventually mean that they would become like the rabbi. In fact, they would think like the rabbi. They would begin to pray like the rabbi. They would interpret Scripture like the rabbi. They would teach like the rabbi. That's what they would do. And I have to think about the thing that I have heard a number of times. Life is the sum of the three people that you spend most of your time with. And so they understood being with the rabbi meant that they would become like the rabbi. And eventually, what would happen after they had gone through this period of becoming like the rabbi, there might be a time where they're sitting around and the rabbi looks to a particular student and he says, "Go and make disciples." In other words, go and do as I have done. It's now your turn to find people that will follow you, and you will train them in the same way that I have trained you. So I want to go back to verse 19 here for a moment. Jesus called out to them, "Come follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." Come follow me. So when Peter and Andrew heard this, and James and John heard this, they understood that this was not just some informal sort of situation, that Jesus was calling them to a radical reorientation of their life. That from here on out, the entire rhythm of their life is centered around being with Jesus. So let me tell you what happened in 1991. 1991, I was asked on a Friday if I would be willing to go to, with a group of students from Dallas Christian College to eastern New Mexico. And they were looking for a guy that would preach in Artesia. I preached my first sermon in Artesia, New Mexico, to 10 people. And so they asked me to go on this trip. There was a group of guys called the Preachers. We were the cool guys. We went and preached, and then there were other people that led songs and sang songs and so on like that. So that was how that trip went. Well, on our way home, we are east of Carlsbad. We're in far west Texas. We had stopped at a convenience store, and I made it well known that I cannot sleep in a vehicle. The school had a rule that you had to have two people awake at all times. And so one dude, his name was Sean Romero. Sean Romero came up and said, "Hey, would you trade me places? Everybody else wants to go to sleep, but they need somebody to stay awake in the other end." So I was like, "Sure." So I get in the seat behind the driver, and there's this girl sitting beside me. And so we start talking. And believe it or not, we talked all the way home, all the way to Dallas. Next couple days, I just did everything I could to make sure that I was in her proximity. Okay? Every waking moment was spent together. In fact, I'll even tell you that I drove through a snowstorm a few weeks after that to drive up to Oklahoma City. And if you know anything about snow in Texas and Oklahoma, it is a risky proposition to get on the road. But I just wanted to be with her. So I can't, for the life of myself, remember who that was. No, I'm kidding. I went on to marry that girl, and we still love to be together. We still love to be with one another. In fact, what we have done as a couple is we have developed certain rhythms, and those rhythms in life that we have developed are aimed at solidifying together, solidifying like being with one another. And I'll go as far as to say that if the rhythm is off, the relationship is off. A couple weeks ago, we had a slew of people in our house, and we love our family. We really do. We love our grandkids. But Tara came to me and said, "You know, I miss us." I mean, and so, again, the rhythms were off. The relationship was off. And I want to go as far as to say, as followers of Jesus, we need to develop healthy rhythms aimed at being with Jesus. Again, life is the sum of the three people that we spend most of the amount of our time with. And being with Jesus has a very specific purpose. So there are rhythms, things like Bible study, things like prayer, things like solitude and silence should be part of that. Fasting should be part of that. Worship should be part of that. Community and Bible study with other Christians should be part of it. There's different rhythms. And listen, if the rhythms are off and you're saying, I just don't feel as close to Jesus as I should, it's probably because either the rhythms are off or the rhythms have never started in the first place. And so we think about that. Jesus is inviting them, "Come, follow me, be with me," is the invitation of Jesus. And so what we have to say is to be a Christ follower means to be with Jesus. And so that's the very first item that we're going to mention here today. But I want to go back to verse 19. Jesus called out to them, "Come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people." So at the invitation of be with Jesus, there is also a become like Jesus. In fact, he says, "I will show you." And I actually love what it talks about in how it phrases it in the English Standard Version, "and I will make you." So Jesus knew continual presence with him, there is likelihood that people will then become like him. So be with Jesus, but also become like Jesus. So to be a Christ follower means to become like Jesus. So I'm going to throw out a big, gigantic, churchy word. I've never heard this word used outside of church ever. Sanctification. And sanctification is a big, giant word that I'm going to say is this. It is continual life change to become like Jesus. Listen, I think if you were to ask every Christ follower, every follower of Jesus, the question, do you want to become like Jesus? What would most people say? Resoundingly, yes. I want to become like Jesus. We understand that that is the design. We deep down inside understand that this should be the goal of life, that the longer I walk with Jesus, the more I will look like Jesus and act like Jesus, the more I will become like Jesus. But here's the deal. We want to become like Jesus without spending time with him. We cannot, circumvent the process. It's kind of like losing weight. It's the new year, right? And so everybody says, I need to lose weight. I'll be honest with you, over the last year and a half or so, I've packed on 15 extra pounds. I want to lose weight. But here's one of the things that I have to tell myself. I can't keep doing life as it was and get the results that I want. And so I can't get I become like Jesus and continue life as it was. There has to be some kind of change that happens, and I think ultimately we have to look back at that and say, what does it look like for me to be in the continual presence of Jesus? What does it look like for me to be with Jesus? So back here again, look at verse 19. It says, Jesus called out to them, come, follow me, and I will show you how to fish for people. So we be with Jesus, we become like Jesus, and Jesus says, if you spend time with me and become like me, I will teach you how to fish for people. And here's the cool thing. Jesus was not the originator of the idea of fishing for people. Jewish rabbis would oftentimes use that as an expression of go out and do as I did. Go out now and fish for people. And so I think Jesus is basically saying, be with me, become like me, and eventually you will do as I do. To be a Christ follower means to do as Jesus did. And I know that this is a big, gigantic thing, and you're thinking, you know what, Brandon? I don't ever envision myself walking on water. Nor do I. But I do think and believe with all of my heart that we can have compassion for those who are hurting. And we can see people the way that Jesus saw people. And we can have conversations the way that Jesus had conversations. We can do this. And here's the interesting thing. After 3 years of spending time with Jesus, being with Jesus, the journey of becoming like him. And I think that was a continual journey that the apostles walked through their entire life. Jesus died. He was resurrected on the third day. And at just about the time he was about to ascend back into heaven, he said, go and make disciples. In other words, basically he says, go and do as I did. You've spent time with me. Your life is now transformed. Go and do as I did. Now, with that in mind, I just want to share something with you, and this is our bottom line for today. To follow Jesus requires us to be with Jesus, become like Jesus, and do as Jesus did. You want to know what it means to follow Jesus? And I thank John Mark Comer in his book, Practicing the Way, for enlightening me on that. That basically what we find here is that this is not rocket science. This is not reinventing the wheel. What I love about this is simple. I'm going to tell you something about Brandon Shaffer. If you put complexity into the situation, I am out. Really. Like, I've been around, and I've been in those conferences where they say, you need to do this with your organization and this with your organization. And I'm like, you know what, dude, I'm out. This is too complicated for me. So I love this because, as Comer laid it out, this is simple. This gives me a clear pattern at which to form my life around. And here's another cool thing, though, and one that I think we often miss. In fact, please understand me that simple does not always mean easy. And so with this, look at verse 20. And they left their nets at once and followed him. And again, we find that James and John, they basically left Dad in the boat and said, we're off. We're off to a different life and a new life and a radical life. But here's one of the things I want you to understand. We can't be with Jesus, become like Jesus, or do as Jesus did without radical life realignment. Something's got to change. And I want to say something today that is hard. And when I say this is hard, I have a hard time saying this because I'm going to tell you this is an area of life I'm not nailing it. I'm not thriving in this area. We want all the benefits and privileges of being a Christian without any of the life adjustment or sacrifice of following Jesus. I mean, seriously, we want heaven. We want forgiveness. We want grace. We want salvation. But we want to keep on living the way we've been living. And that's not Jesus' design. In fact, it's pretty clear that there was radical life change from the get-go. And here's the deal. We can't follow Jesus by cramming Jesus into our already too busy of a life. I mean, there are aspects of life that have to change. In fact, I'll even go as far as to say there's going to be parts of life that no longer make the cut in life. That it's just gone. It's like, I can't do this and follow Jesus. And you probably already know some areas of life that there are things that should no longer make the cut in life. So an earlier question. Are you a consumer or customer of all things church? Are you a fan? Or are you a follower of Jesus? So with that, I want to ask, we're not going to do head, heart, and hands this morning. I'm just going to ask 3 really hard questions. If you use the journals that we hand out, please journal this. What is a new rhythm I can add to help me be with Jesus? Now, I want to share something with you as far as rhythms and changes in life. I had a minister friend one time tell me something, and he asked the question of a particular person in my life, like, what 2 things do you think need to happen as far as change in their life? And I said, 10. I've got 20. And he said, well, the human brain cannot handle that much change. So I know you're probably saying, well, I need to do this, and I need to do this, and I need to do this. Let's just talk about what is one new rhythm that you can develop. What is one new rhythm that you can develop? It might be saying, I'm going to get up 15 minutes earlier, 30 minutes earlier. I'm going to read a chapter in the Bible. I'm going to write some notes about it in my journal, and then I'm going to pray. And I'm going to make that part of my day. It might be becoming part of a small group. It might be fasting, which is something that we don't talk enough about in our walk with Jesus. I have become a huge fan of silence. I'm a huge fan of contemplative prayer, which sounds kind of new agey and all, but the value of sitting in silence and just asking God a couple of questions and say, you get to dictate the conversation. I want to listen to you. And maybe that's something that you need to add to your life. But also with that, what is one area of my life that I need to become more like Jesus? Again, you're like, well, I need to stop this, I need to stop this. You're thinking, I've got a myriad of things. Start with one. Start with one change to say, okay, I'm going to dive in to this. I'm going to let Jesus work in this. And then also, what is something that Jesus did that I can also do? Next Sunday, Jim and I are going to have a conversation about how Jesus had conversations. And all of us can have conversations. All of us can have conversations with people a lot like Jesus had conversations with people, that he actually moved the needle of their commitment and relationship to him through those conversations. Let's go to God in prayer. Father God in heaven, thank you for your design. I thank you that you have given us a picture of what it means to follow your Son. And so, Father, I pray that we're emboldened to know that this is not a complicated venture, that you've not asked us to do something that is absolutely impossible, that there is a pattern of life that we can develop, that we can grow in, that we can evaluate ourselves in by simply being with you, becoming like your Son, and doing as he did. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.